back to another episode of the World Canon Podcast. Before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do. First of all, if you'll notice by the sound, you don't have to listen to my nasty mouth breathing anymore because I got a nice pop filter for my microphone. But it's one of those big round ones and it's kind of blocking the view of my computer screen. So I might have to figure out something else about that. On another note, seeing as this is a history podcast, I'm going to start including a bibliography in every episode. I'll just include a link to probably a Google Doc containing all of my references I use for my research in each episode, just as a means of credibility. And just in case I get something wrong and somebody yells at me on the internet about it, I can say, no, I got it from this guy, and point him to who was actually wrong and cover my own butt, basically. Also, on top of that, last episode I mentioned how the Civil War was pretty much only about slavery and the rights to own slaves. Amongst other things, I wanted to clarify on that a little bit. It was primarily about slavery, but it was also, like most, if not all wars, about money. Excuse me, I know people love when you cough into the mic. The South's main source of commerce, especially at this time, was agriculture. Crops like tobacco and cotton, sugar and corn made up a bulk of their economy. And most of the plantations that these crops were grown on were owned by the elite of the South, the financially elite, and these plantations were operated by slaves. So, if you get rid of the free labor, hence the slaves, and did this wild thing like pay them, it would result in a massive decrease in general profits and a massive increase in the cost of living. Just like the British abolition of slavery about a century earlier resulted in the wealthy of the British Empire having to pay heavily for it out of pocket, and the cost of living skyrocketing. Well, maybe not skyrocketing, but going much higher because products were no longer produced through slave labor, for free, and actually required paid labor. So obviously the elites or the wealthy or the states, making very profitable economies off of this, wouldn't really like the idea of a national abolition movement. So what do? You secede and start your own country where slavery is perfectly fine. For guys like Lincoln, on the other hand, Abraham Lincoln, of course, what other Lincoln would I be talking about? It was about reunifying the Union, keeping the nation in one piece, not letting the government for the people, of the people, by the people, like he said in his Gettysburg Address, from disappearing from the face of the earth. Just wanted to clear that up and put that out there. And speaking of Civil War, let's see what this is.
We turn now to the battle at the border this morning. The Take Our Border Back convoy says it will drive from Virginia Beach to Eagle Pass this weekend.
According to a release from the group, the trucks will branch off to hold rallies across Arizona, California, and Texas. The convoy comes at a time when Texas lawmakers and the Biden administration continue to battle over razor wire along the Rio Grande. The Biden administration accuses Texas of interfering with federal enforcement of immigration law.
They need to be here. They don't have enough Border Patrol people anyway. We got it covered. Mr. President, you say you want to secure the border. Texas has secured it. Leave it alone.
We got it, Mr.
We don't need you down here.
Mr. President Biden, this is Texas. We've got this. We've got this, Mr. President. You don't worry yourself about this. We got all razor wire. We got all razor wire, and we have all cowboys and their lassos. We got all razor wire, Mr. President Biden. We have all National Guard, Mr. President. You don't need to send those Border Patrol boys around here no more, okay? Texas has got this, Mr. President. I don't know why I'm making him sound like a Cajun. Yeah, this is big news. Will this escalate into Civil War 2.0? I don't think so. No, logically, no, I don't think so. Would that be cool? I probably shouldn't comment on that, but no, logically, no, this wouldn't escalate into a civil war because, like I mentioned earlier about the whole money thing in wars, I don't think there's enough money tied. Hold on one second. Let me take this headphones off. I can't stand listening to myself speak. I don't think there's enough money tied up in this or claims to power, wealth, or anything along those means to trigger a war. More than likely, all that will come of this is a whole bunch of court proceedings and state of Texas and federal government suing each other in the Supreme Court. Just like every other state versus government scandal apart from the Civil War. Maybe worst case scenario, some pissed off 19-year-old from Dallas in the Texas National Guard loses his mind and draws a firearm on a Border Patrol agent and gets arrested and gets his butt sued inside and out. But other than that, I don't know about a civil war per se. Maybe some cool skirmishes with a cartel. That'd be neat. I don't know. I'd like to see that. But that being said, if it does come down to it, I'm from North Idaho. We're all redneck hillbillies up here. We love our guns and we love Texas. We support Texas and we also hate the federal government. Not really, but kind of. So things happen. I know what side I'm gonna be on, or my state will be on, I should say. This is not my actual official opinion. I'm joking. Any sponsors who want to sponsor me, BetterHelp, Bespoke Post, who else is there right now? Factor, Raid Shadow Legend. You don't sponsor podcasts, but if you would like to, hey, I know I'm new. This is only 2 episodes, but hey, listen, this is gonna be big. Trust me. You want to hop on this bandwagon now. These are not real opinions. These are jokes. Oh, man. Yeah. No, history in the making for sure, but I don't know about a war. There is that Civil War movie, though, coming out this summer with that guy who plays Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec. Can't remember his name, don't really care. That looks kind of interesting. I might see that and make a little review of it on here. I don't know. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this is just a, your typical example of blow it out of proportions by the media, as they like to do, because it's fun or something, I guess. I'm doing it now, talking about this on here, but hey, you people in the world love listening to and hearing about crazy stuff. Listen, I'm 2 episodes in and I'm already a political podcast. By next week, I'm going to be talking about true crime, because that's what people like. That's what people listen to. Who cares about actual history? Not that this isn't. This is history in the making. Like this is pretty big. Let's be honest. Not wartime big, but still pretty big. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of like to keep an optimistic and logical view on these things. I like to think about happy things, really. I don't really like to, lean into this whole Fox News, CNN sort of like, oh, everybody hates each other thing. I like to kind of envision that we're still one whole country and we're all fellow Americans and we can get through stuff like this and still, stand under the same flag together at the end of the day. But maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, on that note, let's get into the actual episode. This is episode 2 of Grant versus Lee. Gosh. The Siege of Vicksburg. Alright, so I'm finally recording this now 2 days after recording that intro, so let's see if I can get back on the same train of thought I had for this episode, or maybe we'll make something completely new today. So, Vicksburg. Before we get into it, you might be asking yourself, what is Vicksburg? Why is it so important? Who cares? Well, listen here, stupid, and I'll tell you. Vicksburg was and still is a city in the state of Mississippi, in the country, the United States, at this time the Confederate States, in the North American continent, on planet Earth, and in the Milky Way galaxy. Why did it matter? Well, listen to this. Vicksburg, along with the city of Port Hudson, several miles to the south, were 2 Confederate-controlled cities in the state of Mississippi, remember, built directly on the Mississippi River. So they bordered right up against the Mississippi River. Now, at this point in the war, the Confederacy's naval force, which wasn't much to begin with, was practically non-existent. However, the Union, on the other hand, had a very powerful naval force, most of which at this point was being used to blockade the entire southern coast, blocking their imports and exports. Remember how they were mainly an agricultural economy, while they exported to other countries besides the North United States. The Union also had a riverboat Navy force that controlled pretty much the entire Mississippi north and south of Vicksburg and Port Hudson. However, the stretch of river in between Vicksburg and Port Hudson were still in Confederate hands, meaning they could go back and forth and cross however they please without having to worry about being attacked by the Union, which meant that connected the 2 halves, more like 2/3 and 1/3 of the Confederacy, being Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, and Louisiana on the west, and Mississippi, Alabama, all those other states to the east. And it was those states in the west, Texas, Missouri, and all that, that provided a lot of food and raw materials to the rest of the Confederacy. So having that open line of connection was extremely crucial to the Confederacy's efforts. However, that also meant it was extremely crucial to the Union to take control of that portion of the river to cripple the Confederacy's supply line. The task to take this river stronghold was given to General Sherman, Admiral Porter, and none other than General Hiram Ulysses Grant, the second main character of our series. Their adversary was General John Pemberton, who, along with his about 30,000 men, had a year to prepare defenses, having placed over 170 cannons into their earthworks around the city. That's a lot of firepower. Now, attempts have been made to take the city many times, including in Grant's efforts. He tried several times to cross the Mississippi at Vicksburg, but defenses were too strong. He even tried digging canals and finding paths through the many swamplands of Louisiana with the help of Admiral Porter's fleet of ironclad riverboats. Now, what are ironclads, you may also be asking? I'm not sure how much you may already know about this topic. Well, just a quick little side note. So you remember how old 18 warships, if you've ever seen pictures or watched them in the movies, they're big and wooden and they have sails and stuff. Well, imagine you take one of those, make it smaller so it can fit in a river, remove the sails, and make it steam powered, like those big steam powered river boats. And then what you do is you slather iron plates all over it and make it look like a tank floating in the water, and then you stick cannons inside it pointing out everywhere. Some of them even had turrets, like the USS Monitor, which literally had a rotating turret on top, kind of like a tank, but with a powder charged 1800s cannon inside. Eventually, the Union Army and Grant realized trying to cross the river this way would result in too many casualties and a failure, so he decides to move his army 40 miles south to Bruinsburg, where they're able to cross successfully. Grant then goes on a campaign north towards Jackson, marching on the east side of the Black River, screening himself from Pemberton in Vicksburg. His plan is to march north to Jackson, Mississippi, knocking out any sort of Pemberton support from the capital, and then marching west in an effort to take out what's left of Pemberton's supply line from Jackson before actually reaching Vicksburg. A series of 5 battles are fought during this march. Efforts were made by the Confederates to halt Grant by actually going out and attacking his advance. One such effort, made by Confederate infantry and cavalry, was at the Battle of Champion Hill, where they were actually faced by black Union soldiers and, well, were beaten back pretty bad. By May 18th, 1863, Grant reaches Vicksburg with around 70,000 troops. Pemberton soldiers have stretched in an 8-mile-long defensive parabola around the city. In a defensive line of trenches and earthworks, with 9 major forts defending the roads leading into the city. It's almost like the eastern front of World War I, if you can imagine, just miles of trenches and infantry and artillery. Grant notices this, and being the sort of brash man that he is, wants to avoid a siege so he doesn't waste any time, and orders an assault by the very next day. Hiram Ulysses Grant was born to a merchant family in Ohio on April 27, 1822, and grew up in Georgetown, Ohio. His father, who supported his family as a tanner and merchant, barely from Boston now, merchant, soon came to realize that Grant would not be the son to follow in his footsteps. Growing up, everyone called him by his middle name, Ulysses, which is probably why today so many people still know him as Ulysses instead of his first name, Hiram. He became very good with horses growing up and had an uncanny skill at riding and taming them, which would come in handy later. Once he turned 17, his father, by the name of Jesse Grant, didn't like I said, expect him to become a merchant like himself. So what he did was he wrote to their state representative, Thomas L. Hamer, to help young Grant get into the military academy West Point. Remember that place? That's where everybody went. There, because of a clerical issue during his admittance into the school, he became known as we know him today, Ulysses S. Grant. I guess somebody thought he had another middle name or something. His friends at the school, though, called him Uncle Sam. One of those friends in particular being General James Longstreet. Remember that Confederate general from the last episode? That same guy. They were buddies. I mean, this is how Civil War works. Friends against friends, brothers against brothers. Dads against sons, cousins against uncles, aunts, brother uncles, father dads, father brothers. I don't know. There's probably a bunch of weird incest stuff going on too, but we'll get past that. He graduated in 1843, and during the Mexican-American War, he served as a lieutenant. He actually saw the war as unjust, and throughout his whole life would refer to it as the unjust war, but he still served to the best of his ability as an active duty. One example in particular, and this is where the whole really good at horse stuff comes into play, was at the Battle of Monterey. During intense street-to-street urban fighting, which I can't even imagine how that works with like muskets and stuff like that. But anyway, during intense street-to-street urban fighting, his unit, which was in the front, ran low on ammo. Can't really do a lot if you don't have ammo, but the enemy does, and they're shooting you while you're trying to stab them. He rode on horseback through heavy enemy fire with a dispatch for reinforcements and ammunition. Afterwards, he then rode back through the same intense enemy fire to his unit in the front with the help he'd gathered. And the U.S. went on to win at Monterey. After the Mexican-American War, though, Grant fell out of the Army and proceeded to pursue other opportunities, though none really took root. At the opening of the Civil War in 1861, he rejoined and was appointed as a colonel, but very, very quickly rose through the ranks due to his general leading ability. He soon became general of the Army of Volunteers, which was an army of volunteers, hence the name, that he helped raise and train, and was the same army that he led towards Vicksburg. Speaking of Vicksburg, back to May 19th, 1863, one day after Grant and his army arrived. And remember, he has ordered an assault. This assault will be taking place at the northern end of the city's defenses. The point of attack was a place known as Stockade Redan, one of the forts along the Confederates' line that defended Graveyard Road leading into the city. Here we see an example of Grant's hammer-like tactics that made him unpopular to many in the North. During the assault, which made little to no headway, the Union Army lost over 1,000 men, while the Southerners lost only a mere 70. 3 days later, on the 22nd, Grant orders another assault after a few days of carefully examining the city's defenses. However, not carefully enough, it'll turn out. This attack stretches a 3-mile-long front, but only the 13th Corps, led by General McClernand, manages to get a hold of their portion of the Confederates' trenches and earthworks, but are forced to withdraw. This effort resulted in 3,000 more Union casualties. In only 5 days, the Federals had already lost 4,000 of their own and dealt little damage to the enemy. Finally, on the 23rd of May, 1863, Grant decides to hunker down for the 47-day siege of Vicksburg to end the 18-month campaign in effort to take the city and therefore finally put control of the behemoth of the Mississippi River into Union hands. He digs trenches of his own, known as siege trenches, facing towards the city, and in order to defend against the possibility of being attacked by a relief force, he digs more trenches to the rear and puts General Sherman in charge of their defense. For weeks afterwards, the two sides exchange artillery fire. Grant even ends up borrowing heavy naval guns from Admiral Porter and places them in his trenches to shell the city. I mean, you gotta look up pictures of these things. They're way bigger than the typical land artillery that they'd be using. Vicksburg, though, gets it the worst. They receive shelling from both Grant's line and Admiral Porter's ironclads on the river. The civilians of Vicksburg are forced to live underground in holes dug into the side of the hill that Vicksburg is built on. Almost like British citizens in World War II who were forced to hide in air raid shelters during the Battle of Britain. Things eventually end up getting really bad for the Southern troops. During a siege, like any siege, food and all sorts of supplies run extremely low. Rations are reduced to a handful of rice and peas and only 1 cup of water per man per day. Disease is rampant in the groveled conditions, and people's homes have been turned into hospitals for the scores of wounded and sick. All the while, Grant has his men digging new trenches closer and closer to the city. The reason being, they had a plan that almost sounds like it came out of a Looney Tunes. In the early days of June, unbeknownst to the Confederates, Union sappers and engineers were digging mines under the battlefield all the way to the defensive lines, where they were tunneling beneath their trenches and planting thousands of pounds worth of black powder charges. Finally, on June 25th, 1863, at around 3:30 p.m., their plan comes into play. Over 2,200 pounds of black powder were detonated underneath the 3rd Louisiana Redan. A massive crater is blown into the southern trenches that's over 12 feet deep. Instantly, Union troops charge into the crater, but are met with a starving yet determined foe. Intense close-quarter combat lasts for over 20 hours. I mean, that's 20 hours of stabbing and clubbing and shooting virtually point-blank around this crater. Union soldiers are forced to pull back. Throughout the month, over 13 more of these mines are dug, but only 1 other is ever detonated. However, no attack follows. At this point, in the city of Vicksburg, the people are desperate, soldier and civilian alike. Once again, like I mentioned, disease is rampant, food is extremely scarce, and the people are living underground. The Confederates don't possess the strength to make a breakout attack. Their only hope is to receive outside relief. But you must realize they're essentially cut off from the outside world. So they have no way to really ask for help or know if help is coming. However, Confederate General Johnston realizes their situation and is gathering a relief force of around 30,000 near Jackson, Mississippi, and is preparing to march on the besieging U.S. Army. He will arrive too late. On July 2nd, Pemberton decides he must surrender. He probably had no idea Johnston was coming to help, otherwise he may have tried to hold on a little longer. On July 3rd, Grant and Pemberton meet to discuss terms of surrender. Grant was very blunt and strict on his. He wanted an unconditional surrender of all Confederate forces in the city, meaning they'd be had as prisoners. Pemberton refuses this and leaves. Later, though, Grant and his officers, probably after thinking about the logistics of dealing with 30,000 prisoners and how much trouble that would be, he extends an offer to Pemberton that he accepts. The plan is to parole the Confederate army, meaning they're all sent home with their personal possessions, with the exception of slaves. But those personal possessions include like weapons and stuff, because a lot of the Confederates personally owned their supplies. Don't really know how that works. I have no idea if all these guys actually did that, to be honest. I feel like any one of them that were still pretty determined at fighting this thing out would just like smile and nod to the Union soldiers until, you know, they were out of view and then run off to go join somebody else like Johnston. But I don't really know how you get that to actually work. Anyway, enough getting off track and ranting. Back to the story. On July 4th, Vicksburg is in Union hands. And with that, the Mississippi is under Union control, and the Confederacy is cut in two. No longer will the armies in the East, like that of the Northern Army of Virginia, under the command of General Lee, have the vital resources provided by the Confederate states on the west side of the Mississippi River. This was obviously crippling to the Confederacy, but did not yet constitute a defeat. News of the victory at Vicksburg reaches the papers the same day as the victory at Gettysburg, and is mainly overshadowed by the invading army of General Lee being turned back from Union lands. However, it's well appreciated by one tall, bearded man in particular. Lincoln expressed his gratitude towards Grant in cutting the South in two and reclaiming the great Mississippi River for the U.S. by defending him against many of the people who sought to have him removed because of his hammer-like tactics. These were understandably not appreciated all that much by all.
I just want to be appreciated.
And his resignation is pushed by many. Lincoln is forced to step in and refuse to succeed Grant with another general, stating along the lines of, "I can't afford to lose this man because he fights." Grant had managed to get done what others were too cautious to do. On top of that, instead of firing him, Lincoln does even better. He promotes Grant to Lieutenant General of all Union armies early the following year on March 2nd, 1864. And soon afterward, he would be facing against his greatest challenge yet, General Robert E. Lee of the Confederate States. Alright, if you've made it to the end, thank you so much for coming back and listening to episode 2 of Grant vs. Lee. I'm going to try to stick to the schedule I've got going, uploading one of these like main series episodes every other week. But I want to hopefully soon start getting out an extra episode in the weeks in between where I'll go over probably some completely unrelated topic, hopefully with guests. But yeah, keep your eyes and ears peeled out for those. I'll announce them on my social medias like Twitter, which you can follow me at world.canon.pod. You can also find me on Reddit as user/worldcanon_pod. I'm on a lot of history meme subreddits roaming around there. As a Reddit user, I like to spend my time with the intellectuals online. I also heard there's a lot of nerds on there who like to listen to podcasts, and I was really hoping to try to sucker them into listening to mine, because a lot of them are terminally online, and those are the type of people I want. But yeah, that'd be great. You can also check out the YouTube channel, World Canon Podcast on YouTube. And yes, please do share this with others. It would be incredibly helpful. Remember to also comment on the episodes, especially on Spotify. It just sort of helps bring traffic to the show. Yeah, once again, I appreciate it so much. I'll be back again in a couple weeks with another episode. Thanks so much. See you next time.